Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Does anybody have any subject they want to speak about from Bhagavad Gita? We were talking about the modes of nature last time, weren't we? 3 modes of nature. Okay. There's one verse in the 4th chapter. Does everybody speak English? You don't speak English, do you? So, you want to translate? I mean, it's up to you. So there's one verse in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 4:10, and it says, Vita Raja Vayakroda Manma Anayama Upashisa Ahava Janma Manasa Bhutamad Agataha. And Krishna is explaining that many persons in the past became purified by this knowledge, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. So they all became purified by this process, and then they came to the point of transcendental love. So I'll just read the translation and then the purport. Being freed from attachment, fear and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. You have to repeat that. Being freed from attachment, fear and anger, being fully absorbed in me, and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. As described above, it is very difficult for a person who is too materially affected to understand the personal nature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Generally, people who are attached to the bodily conception of life are so absorbed in materialism that it is almost impossible for them to understand how the Supreme can be a person. Such materialists cannot even imagine that there is a transcendental body which is imperishable, full of knowledge and eternally blissful. In the materialistic concept, the body is perishable, full of ignorance and completely miserable. Therefore, people in general keep this same bodily idea in mind when they are informed of the personal form of the Lord. For such materialistic men, the form of the gigantic material manifestation is supreme. Consequently, they consider the Supreme to be impersonal. And because they are too materially absorbed, the conception of retaining the personality after liberation from matter frightens them. When they are informed that spiritual life is also individual and personal, they become afraid of becoming a person again, and so they naturally prefer a kind of merging into the impersonal void. Generally, they compare the living entities to the bubbles of the ocean, which merges into the ocean. That is the highest perfection of spiritual existence attainable without individual personality. This is a kind of fearful stage of life devoid of perfect knowledge of spiritual existence. Furthermore, there are many persons who cannot understand spiritual existence at all, being embarrassed by so many theories and by contradictions of various types of philosophical speculation. They become disgusted or angry and foolishly conclude that there is no supreme cause and that everything is ultimately void. Such people are in diseased condition of life. Some people are too materially attached and therefore do not give attention to spiritual life. Some of them want to merge into the supreme spiritual cause, and some of them disbelieve in everything, being angry at all sorts of spiritual speculation out of hopelessness. This last class of men take to the shelter of some kind of intoxication, and their effective hallucinations are sometimes accepted as spiritual vision. One has to get rid of all these three stages of attachment to the material world: negligence of spiritual life, fear of spiritual personal identity, and the conception of the void that arises from frustration in life. To get free from these three stages of material concept of life, one has to take complete shelter of the Lord, guided by a bona fide spiritual master, and follow the disciplines and regulative principles of devotional life. The last stage of devotional service is called Bhava, or transcendental love of Godhead. According to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.4.15-16, the science of devotional service, Ado Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangha Tabhajana Kriya Tato Nata Nivritishyat Tato Nishta Ruchis Tata Tata Shaktis Tato Bhavas Tata Prema Jukanshati Sada Kanam Ayam Premana Pradur Bhave Bhavet Kramaha. In the beginning, one may have a preliminary desire for self-realization. This will bring one to the higher stage of trying to associate with persons who are spiritually elevated. In the next stage, one becomes initiated by an ever elevated spiritual master, and under his instructions, the neophyte devotee begins the process of devotional service. By execution of devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master, one becomes free from all material attachments, attains steadiness in self-realization, and acquires a taste for hearing about the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This taste leads one further forward to attachment for Krishna consciousness, which is matured in Bhava, or the preliminary stage of transcendental love of God. Real love for God is called Prema, the highest perfectional stage of life. In the Prema stage, there is constant engagement in transcendental loving service of the Lord. So by the slow process of devotional service, under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, one can attain the highest stage, being freed from all material attachment, from the fearfulness of one's individual spiritual personality, and from the frustration that results in void philosophy. Then one can ultimately attain the abode of the Supreme Lord. Om Ganti Virandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastacharya Sarine. So previous verse to this, Krishna was saying that if we know Krishna's transcendental nature, then we don't have to take birth again in this material world. And so now Krishna explained to Arjuna that, you know, people can't understand that why people can't understand that transcendental nature, why they can't develop the process of devotional service. And he gives three reasons. One is too much attached, fearful, and disgusted, frustrated. And so we find those people in society actually. We were talking about, you know, distributing books. This is a where we can start to perceive that when we meet people and speak to them, you know, what they speak is on their mind, they reveal their mind. And these three things are very prominent in society. When Prabhupada came to the United States, there were many persons who become disgusted with material life. You know, they call them the flower power people or the hippies. And you know, they were actually very intelligent. When a lot of them who joined this movement, they actually, you know, they were so effective in serving Prabhupada. You know, they started the whole movement, and within a few years it was all over the world just by their endeavour. So they were actually very well-educated people, but by that education they realised that, you know, there's nothing in this world. And so they became frustrated. This is one class. And so it says that they take to, you know, they become frustrated and they think that everything is void, or they take to impersonalism. And so has anybody else had that feeling before they came to devotional service?
Sorry?
Did anybody else have any experience like that before they came to devotional service? Yeah, we become like lost, we don't know what to do. We can't go this way, we can't go that way. So what do? You try to satisfy your senses even more to kill the pain. And you know, you start taking different drugs and it just exacerbates the problem. So that's one class, and everybody can identify with that. What about too much attached? That's a big one, isn't it? Even as devotees, we've still got attachment. They may remain for some time. What to do? What should we do? In the 11th canto, Krishna gives us some solace. Would you like to hear what he tells us? Yeah? I think I might be wrong, but it's Canto 11, Chapter 20, takes 27 and 28, I think, two verses together. And Krishna says that my devotee, although attached to material enjoyment, and although after, you know, trying to give it up, he still actually cannot give up such attachment. He should remain happy in devotional service. That's the last thing you feel, isn't it? When you're so, you know, you can't give up your attachments, and you're starting to question yourself and question the process. But Krishna's saying, don't worry. These attachments are not going to go away like that necessarily. So we should carry on peacefully and happily in devotional service. And that outlook, that enthusiastic outlook, will eventually rid us of these attachments. In Bhagavatam it says that the big thing is a false ego, isn't it? The attachment to the body. He says this process, what's that word? It dissolves the false ego. When we think about the word dissolve, it's like effortless, isn't it? You know, you drop a tablet into the water, and it just, you know, after a few seconds it disappears. So this process is doing that. It's dissolving the false ego. And so Krishna is saying in that verse that we should always be enthusiastic no matter what the situation. There's no reason to, we've got the real product. And but he says also, he says that we'll suffer. You know, every time we try to enjoy, there'll be a reaction. He said he should know that there'll be a reaction, but carry on anyway. So then when we have that information, we see that the reactions are actually there to remind us that, you know, there's a better way than this. So the two together, being enthusiastic and getting reactions, we're being pushed towards full surrender to devotional service. So this is attachment. When we're attached, we cannot see anything beyond the attachment we're attached to. It becomes so prominent and it overpowers us. And so people in the material world, they're in that condition. They may even hear, and they may be very philosophical, and they may hear about this process and be convinced, but there's nothing they can do about it. What do we have to do? What's the first thing they have to do? First thing, when we're actually speaking to people, is to get them to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. If they start chanting this mantra on a regular basis, it'll completely change their outlook. Sometimes, you know, there's one devotee, they call him Adi Carter. Has anybody heard of Adi Carter?
Adi Carter. Yeah. He came here.
He came here
a few days. Yeah, he came here. Recently.
Recently?
Yeah, he came here.
So he's been a book distributor all his life. In fact, I joined the Manchester temple and he was the temple president. We didn't have a temple, we had a house. And first day I was out in the garden, and second day I was out on the street. That was the training. Because he was a book distributor, so everybody who came to the temple, they also went on book. But what he does, if nobody takes a book, he has a card in his hand, and he shows them it. He says, this is a very powerful mantra. Can you chant it? And then he'll start chanting the mantra and they start repeating it. Then he gives them the card, and he tells them, if you do this every day, you know, for the next week or two, he says, you'll just notice a change in your whole life. So this is the power of chanting. These three things, Vita, or Raga, Bhava and Krodha, Raga, Bhaya and Krodha, they're almost impossible to overcome. So this Maha Mantra is so powerful. And so, you know, everybody we meet, especially if we do books, we can get everybody to chant. That's one thing anyway. The Maha Mantra cures this attachment. And what was the last one? Anybody remember?
Frustration.
No, we had that one. We had frustration, which we tend to think in terms of, you know, we don't follow religion anyway, we just become an atheist or a gross sense enjoyer. And then we're too attached that we can't even think about doing anything other than what we're doing at the moment. And the last one is? Anger. No? Anger comes from frustration. There's no religion. It's all bogus. Have you heard people say that? They're just frustrated. I was frustrated when I was at school. I was actually interested in religious instruction. But then after a while, you know, we were getting all these instructions from the teacher, and I thought, well, these instructions are so elevated. I don't see anybody following them. And, you know, because I couldn't see anybody following them, I actually lost a lot of faith. And eventually I lost it all. And you couldn't, you know, and the Christian religion, it never really taught any philosophy. One thing that really, you know, put me off for good was that in the Bible, it said, has anybody heard of Methuselah?
He lives 1,000 years.
Who's heard of Methuselah? You've heard of Methuselah?
Yeah.
But he lives 1,000 years. But I
Huh?
don't know.
He lived for 2,000 years nearly.
I don't know.
You were Methuselah. I thought, wow, how can anybody live for 2,000 years? He must be ancient. And so I asked one of the teachers, I said, it was a student who came, a RI teacher, he was a student training. I said, how can somebody live for 2,000 years? Anybody got any answers? He says, their years were shorter than ours. I thought that means, I thought, I've had enough, that's enough. I became frustrated. So what were the last one? We had attachment,
Void.
anger, and fear.
Yeah.
Fear of spiritual existence. Have you met anybody who's fearful of spiritual existence? On books. Many a time, I've stopped people, and there's not many people who'll discuss with you so much. Most people, they actually bypass you, and some stop and they'll take a book, and then some people, very few will start to converse. And first thing you start talking about is we're not the body, right? Oh, and they're interested. Say we're not the body. That's interesting, and they ask a few questions, and then you start talking about karma. Oh, that's really interesting. And then you start talking about reincarnation. And then they ask, so what happens to the soul then at the end of this life? And you say, you get another body, and they go, oh no. Many people say, oh no, not again. This one's bad enough. They're suffering so much that they can't even think about going through it, or they think at the end of this life, that's it, I've had enough. So these are, and eventually sometimes those people, they actually commit suicide. They think, let's finish it all together. So we can practically see in society that these things exist. Do you ever become fearful of the spiritual world? Anybody? No? Anybody become fearful of the spiritual world? There's one thing that made me think, actually. I was reading the pastime of Kaliya serpent, and the mother, she showed me, she's rolling the chapatis, and all of a sudden the door bursts open, and this coward boy comes running. Mother Yashoda, come quickly, that Krishna's in trouble. Oh my God! She drops it. She was running out, and she's running through the forest, and there's all bad omens. And then she comes to this clearing, and in this clearing there's a big lake, and in the middle of this lake is a big snake with multi heads, huge serpent, and guess who's wrapped in the coils of the serpent? The love of our life, Krishna. And when I thought, my God, the agony she will be feeling. Do I really want to go back to the spiritual world? So yeah, there is variegatedness in the spiritual world, and sometimes, people, if they're a little sensitive, they can be put off by that. So there are so many obstacles to spiritual life, but these three are the embodiment of all the obstacles. But if we have a little bit of faith, this particular verse is explaining that gradually, by the association of devotees, we can gradually rise and become free from these, what they call anartas. Anartas mean unwanted things within the heart. And then one's path to spiritual life is safe. We're free from any attachments. And then we get a strong taste. And then eventually that taste turns to a strong attachment to practicing devotional service. And from that attachment to the service comes attachment to Krishna. And then this is called raga. And this is also called bhava. Bhava means feeling, sentiment, mellow. So just like we have an attachment to things in this world, if we can understand we have that same attachment to Krishna, it's actually more. And then, from that attachment we feel some happiness, what you call ecstatic symptoms. And then that happiness eventually turns into, becomes more condensed. Sundarananda Visheshatma, condensed devotion, condensed bliss. And they call this prema. And on that platform we reach the highest platform of the 6 processes of devotional service, which is called Krishna Karshini. Everything attracts Krishna, but a devotee on that platform attracts everything. Krishna attracts everybody, but on that platform the devotee attracts Krishna. So it's not a matter of giving up anything, it's a matter of changing our attachments. And that takes an effort. To change our attachment to material things is a big effort. If people are changing from one thing to another, and they're undergoing a lot of tapasya to do that. Changing from one type of sense gratification to another. But if we actually do the same tapasya to serve Krishna, then there's a much bigger result. So this world is a world of tapasya. It's called tapaloka. And so this material body is not meant actually for enjoying, it's meant for tapasya. And by that tapasya we actually feel happiness. The wealth of the Brahmins is tapasya. They're very austere and they feel blissful as a result of that austerity. For a devotee, his austerity is very minimal. And by the process of devotional service and following that tapasya, little tapasya, that's all, then he experiences not only, Brahman satisfaction, but spiritual satisfaction. And that satisfaction is described as being like an ocean compared to a few droplets of water, compared to the happiness derived from Brahman realization. So what's that verse? Now we're in a situation where the attachment is still there. He says, but by following this process, then eventually the attachment is gradually weakened, and then we become attached to the process of devotional service. So that's what we want. So I'll stop there. Has anybody got any comments or questions? I think I didn't speak about it here, but I gave one example of George Addison. Everybody knows George Addison, right? So, I think you were there actually. So George Addison, he started to write many songs. First of all, he wrote a few songs while he was still with the Beatles. And then when they split up, he started writing his own devotional songs. And anybody name any of those songs? What? My Sweet Lord. Yeah, that was a big one, wasn't it? Even I was amazed when that, I remember I was probably about 15 or 16 maybe when that came out. And I couldn't believe they were singing about God. And but I didn't dwell on it. I didn't know about the Hare Krishnas at that time. I just went on with my life. But then later on, I understood. But it was a real big surprise. And yet, it was actually a big hit throughout Europe. Many countries it got to #1 in a hit parade. And then, any others?
There's instant living in the material world.
Living in the Material World. Was that a song or was it the LP?
The Beatles.
It was a song.
Living in the material world.
Any others?
Instant karma.
Instant Karma.
I, me, mine. I, me, mine.
I, me, mine. You know them all, don't you?
All things must pass. All things must pass.
All things must pass. Nothing's going to stay the same.
Becomes a sign.
If we're happy now, if we're in material consciousness, then there'll be some dissatisfaction. If we're dissatisfied now, then it'll pass and there'll be some satisfaction. I notice that as time goes on, it doesn't seem so long ago when I was practicing devotional service. It just seemed like everything will stay the same. And you read about, people leaving the body, and it's like so far in the future. But then you see it starts, and everything starts to change. The temple I used to be at, there's nobody there who was there before. Everybody is left. On the same street when I used to visit, the family, there's nobody on the street I can recognise anymore. Everything's completely changing.
It's Sheffield.
Sheffield, yeah.
Sheffield.
Because we have a subtle attachment, don't we, for our homes. We still, subconsciously we say, I'm going home. Actually, it's not our home. And as soon as my parents left this world, then it became a stark reality. This is not my home anymore. The thing I've actually identified with all my life, it's actually nothing to do with me. I've got no connection anymore. And so that's what death brings. But if we can realise that before we leave this world, and then we can do something about it. Anyway, coming back to the point about George Harrison's songs, I haven't got to the point yet. Here Comes the Sun, is that one?
Oh, Here Comes the Sun.
What's it?
It is big about Prabhupada. Here Comes the Sun. This is the sun is Prabhupada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's referring to Prabhupada or even
Prabhupada.
and Krishna, yeah.
Here comes the sun, here comes Prabhupada.
Yeah. Yeah, Prabhupada, there's one verse, what is it now? There's one verse in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it said, when the Son of Krishna arises in our life, then all ignorance disappears. Krishna Surya Sama Maya Haya Andikara. Yan Krishna Tahan Maya Adikara.
I want to say, all the Beatles, they met Prabhupada. They met Prabhupada,
Yeah.
personally. And of course, among them, George Harrison became a devotee, became involved. But all of them, they met Prabhupada.
Yeah.
Fortunate to meet Prabhupada.
Yeah, they were all affected to some degree. I remember, we'll come back to the songs in a minute, but there was one, I once, because I'd actually clicked on George Harrison on the internet and read about his songs, it starts throwing up other things about the Beatles. And there was one interview with the Beatles, and it was Ringo Starr, and he was talking about his relationship with, the others, especially George Harrison. And he was saying that his daughter, she'd got some sort of serious disease in America, and he was going to see her. But first, he wanted to go and see George Harrison. And at that time, George Harrison, he got cancer. And he says when he went to see him in Switzerland, he says he was laid on the bed and he couldn't even move. He was so, he said advanced so much. And he was talking to him, and he was asking Ringo Starr about his situation. And he was, comforting him that his daughter was so sick. And at one point, he said, when are you going to Australia? When are you going to the United States? He says, in a few days' time. And he says, George Harrison said at that point, he said, do you want me to come with you? He couldn't even move, and he says, at that point, Ringo said, he burst into tears. So it shows what elevated consciousness he was in at that time. Yes, so, you know, that service I did for Prabhupada, it never goes in vain. That service we're doing now for Prabhupada, everybody here, it's not going to go in vain. And, you know, at the end of life, Prabhupada, he took off his ring and he gave it to one of his senior men, Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He said, give that ring to George.
I like especially the pastime of Hari's son of Hari. He's already initiated. He doesn't need to take initiation, he's already initiated.
Yeah.
Hari's son of Hari.
Yeah,
That's it.
actually somebody sent me an email, not an email, a WhatsApp message. And they read something in Prabhupada's books, or a conversation actually, and it was Prabhupada. They were distributing books, the book distributors, and it crossed one of the book distributors' mind. He thought, you know, in order to go back to Godhead, these people have to take initiation. It's not enough to give them the books, and it was really worrying him. And then at that time, Prabhupada was visiting, and so he said to Prabhupada, you know, we're giving out these books, but they have to be initiated to go back to Godhead. Most people can't do that. And Prabhupada turned and looked at him and says, when they read my books, they're already initiated. And so in that case it seems true, but usually we have to take formal initiation.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why can't we just read Prabhupada's book?
We need a spiritual master in order to be introduced.
Introduce.
We are personal movement. We are personalists, not impersonalists. So we need a spiritual, physical spiritual master.
Okay.
One devotee, one Mataji asked, no, can we associate through a book? Papa said you can associate through a book, but you need a spiritual master. You need a physical spiritual master.
Yeah, we spoke about that the other day, how, you know, there's the instructions, but how we put them into practice needs, you know, we need to be personally shown. You know, we're all associated in this temple, and, you know, even unconsciously, we're acting as spiritual masters and disciples every day when we speak to one another. When we hear conversations, we're getting realizations and the benefit of other people's experience. So that's also shiksha. And so the spiritual master's duty is to make sure the disciple gets enough association and information to help him to cross over the material energy and go back to Godhead. And you know, initiation it's a process which starts long back. You know, as soon as we start meditating on what am I doing here? You know, what's this all about? Then Krishna's in the heart, and he recognizes that, and he starts to direct us. Anybody know that verse? Brahmanda Brahmate Bhagavanji Guru Krishna Prasadi Bhakti Lakavir. And then then when Krishna sees that, when we're ready, he sends a bona fide representative to guide us.
So we can understand, since the spiritual master is eternal, sometimes is not manifested and become manifest. The spiritual master is eternal. Relationship with the spiritual master lasts forever.
Yeah, I mean, if the disciple's serious and the spiritual master's bona fide, then that's the case, yeah. But you know, initiation means that you know, we gradually start to become more interested in spiritual life, and it may not be devotional life at that time, and then we may get, you know, a link to a devotee, And then when we start following, as it said in this verse, eventually we come to the point where we become serious. And then we promise, make a vow. So that's also there. We promise to follow. And Prabhupada says, you know, it's a gentleman's promise. We don't go back on it. You know, Chaitanya Charitamrita explains that, you know, it's enough to go back to God if we chant the Hare Krishna mantra. But I think everybody's experienced enough to know that there's still other things to take into consideration. You know, we can't make progress on our own, can we? It's very difficult. So yeah, initiation is stages, and at some point we promise, and then then we become really serious, and then we that's the point, is we become really serious, and then the spiritual master can, with confidence, he can guide us. Before that time, he can't really interfere too much. Not that he does it, not that he interferes, but he has to be kept more careful, that's all. Okay, anything else?
So the last interview of George Harrison was very interesting. Last interview of George Harrison. He spoke, one of the last interview, he spoke about spiritual life, Prabhupada, reincarnation, everything. It was very interesting. He had many realizations. Very interesting. So before he left his body.
It's amazing.
He went to Vrindavan to see Prabhupada also. He went to India to see Prabhupada. Yeah.
Okay. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Tantra Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki. Gaura Premanand.